Now, still in Griffin, part three on human rights, and we are now going to do have a look at chapter 12, a right to life, a right to death. Now we've seen that there is arguably a right to life, a human right to life. Originally it started off from a very negative point of view. It's like your right to life was just not to be wantonly killed. You can be killed by the state through due process, right? So the right to life doesn't necessarily negate, let's say, the possibility of a legitimate form of capital punishment, right? Not if you just interpret it as a negative right. It just simply says that if the state is going to take your life, it can't do it wantonly. It has to do it through due process. So you have a right not to be wantonly killed. You may have a right against all the fellow citizens to kill you. They can't do that because that would fall under the wanton killing. But the state could have a judicially accepted manner of judging that they can put you to death. Okay, but of course, as we saw, the right to life, if it's something like don't wantonly kill me, but if I trip and I fall into a river and you happen to walk by and for some reason you're carrying a life preserver, do I have a right? And you're not using it, right? You're not running to save someone else like your brother or something like that, but you're just walking by and you have no use for it at the moment. I would have a right to life. That would include your obligation to just pass me that life preserver, something like that. So now the right to life has positive duties. It's not just for you to not push my head under the water, but to actually help me. This exploded over the centuries, and it's difficult to put parameters on. So this Locke seems to have a negative view or a view that the right to life is negative, but no, he's actually more complicated that. Now, Locke uh, Griffin takes a brief look at him and he says, well, equality amongst humans is going to be something that's going to ground the equivalent of what we might call a human life. It's not like an equality in terms of like a simple one, like saying something that's obviously false, like we're all equally good at everything or whatever. No, he doesn't mean that. It's a moral equality, and it's not even it's not like an economic equality, like the equality of opportunity, like to goods. It's not connected to goods or whatever. It's a deeper one in the sense that it's really not a concrete one. But it has concrete results, of course. It's an equality of respect, and that sort of notion of the equality of respect can unpack it in a number of ways. But it's when you say something like everybody's desires are basically the same. We may desire different things, but our desires should all be treated with equal respect. I cannot, in good conscience or logically, say that my desires are more important than yours, like intrinsically more important. So that if we both desire something, let's say when our desires line up, that we both desire I don't know, to have some property to keep the rain off of us or something, or we both desire a job, or we both desire to have a life that has a loving relationship. You can name a bunch of things, but these things that are all central to an autonomously formed, conceptualized, and well-ordered life, that all those desires are they merit equal respect. That's the position. Differentiating and giving different respect, that demands to be told that discrepancy or that kind of partiality, that is where the burden of the argument lies, not on the assertion of the equality of it. So we start with that equality of respect. I'm just going to put a little asterisk on it. So this, my desires, yours, all deserving of equality of respect. Griffin says that, yeah, that's going to work. That's going to ground human rights, but it's also essentially the moral position. Once really what it means to take a moral position, at least with other human beings, is to start respecting other, like to have a real understanding that there's other people, right? And isn't that the first thing that we start to teach children? Is you're not the only one in the world. Humans start off with an incredibly strong, egocentrism, right? They just, that's it. They want stuff and they get mad and they toddlers can be pretty rough when they want something. Babies just yell and scream. And it takes a while for us to teach, or they need a while to grow up before they can be taught, hey, there's other people in the world, and they want, like, Susie wants a piece of cake too, just as much as you do. right? And so you start teaching children a basic Locke, kind of I'm just going to give kids a Locke lecture, right? Equality of respect. And that's the basis of the moral perspective. That's how we start entering into the moral world. And you can even think that perhaps non-human animals have a rudimentary form of it as well. I suspect they do, because they certainly exhibit behavior that seems to look like it's instantiating this principle. But of course, you always have to be careful about behavior instantiating principles, because, you know, some people act like Santa Claus exists. Okay, but nonetheless, Griffin says that while that's the that will do the trick for grounding, that will do the trick for grounding human rights. It's basically the grounding of morality. And so if you really say, okay, that's going to ground human rights and it grounds morality, he's concerned, I don't think this is a very strong argument, but again, it's one of concern, that this is going to eventually say, oh, well, okay, if it's all based on equality of respect, you're going to again run into that problem of turning morality into talk about HRs. And in other words, once again, back in the land of what Griffin is always trying to reject is the is sort of a bloated view of human rights, where it's all morality is a branch of, or it's coextensive with human rights talk. So he said, not surprisingly, go back to his view, the personhood position, which we've seen over and over. That's what we should use to ground human rights, because we have duties to preserve personhood. And again, not just others, but ours. So we have duties to preserve our own personhood. So there is a kind of intrinsic value there, and Griffin says it does, although that's always hard to unpack, because it usually leads off into theology, right? But he thinks that there are, like from a secular position, we can say that there is something intrinsically valuable about human life, and it should be preserved. But personhood not only has an existence, it is an expressive thing. Like, it's not just a static thing. Like, it doesn't just sit there like a pen. Personhood is a dynamic object. It's like respiration. It's breathing. It's functioning. So when we talk about our normativity, it's not just a thing. It's an activity. So in addition to the preservation of the existence of it, we're also preserving its activity. And with a slight sort of logical extension, the exercise of it includes its products, right? So the exercise of normativity, exercising it would include the products of the conceptualizations that it makes, right? So when I'm a normative agent, I conceive, once again, we've said this over and over, of the well-formed and well-conceptualized life that I've developed through my autonomy, and that through my liberty and my welfare, I'm going to pursue. So it's the exercise of it and the direction. Now, Griffin says neither preservation has absolute a priority. So sometimes the existence of it may take priority over the exercise of it. Why? Because you could exercise a conception that my life is not worth living. As a matter of fact, when a great philosopher in the 20th century, Albert Camus, said, look, the first choice you make is the question of suicide. That's it. Everything else is a game, is trivial. I guess a bit heavy-handed, but what if he's right in one sense, that is a fundamental kind of choice? Now that's very debatable stuff, but nonetheless, think of it as a logical possibility in terms of your autonomy, in terms of your normative agency, that you may, Griffin says, with a clear mind, decide that the life that you currently have is not one that you want to live. And sometimes we do say, well, it's perfectly rational if someone's living in, let's say, with a very severe disease, and it's beyond really the reach of modern painkillers. And unfortunately, there are cases where it is very difficult to manage the pain, and the management of it might lead to, well, fine, maybe it's not excruciating, but it's not a very pleasant life to live anymore. And you may decide rationally that it's not worthwhile. So the exercise of your normativity includes the product of this exercise, namely the conclusion that a rationally arrived at conclusion that this life is not something I wish to pursue, and therefore that can take precedence over the existence. So neither of these has absolute priority. So yeah, you could come up and argue for a human right to death, But in certain cases, it might be overridden where it's not an absolute right. That shouldn't come as any surprise because Griffin has insisted that he's not a Kantian over and over in the sense that human rights are, as Kant would say, like in the strong sense that they're absolute, right? No. So Griffin, keep in mind, this has ramifications. You're not absolutely sovereign over your own body. You can make the rational argument, and you are, in a sense, sovereign over it, but it's not absolute. That human right could, in some cases, be overridden. So he admits, though, and this is an important connection now with science, is under what conditions would we say that autonomy is not really there? That, like for let's say advanced stages of Alzheimer's, something like that. How do we make that judgment when we start talking about whether or not someone's still has real autonomy, even though we've got all the conditions in place in terms of welfare, in terms of the external environment, that we would say that the disease has essentially robbed the person of that? That's not a philosophical judgment. That's a scientific judgment. And that's where Griffin says he's not competent in areas of medicine to make those judgments. So he just leaves this open. But he says, yes, in principle, there are these rights, but in principle, they can also be overridden. But when the thresholds have been met, that's not a philosophical question. That's a medical question.